Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing today? All good? All right, it's post-lunch. You might be feeling sleepy, but we'll try to keep it as interactive as it can be. Please stay with us. Right? The introduction is already done. It is the day 2 of Data Engineering Summit. It gives us immense pleasure to be here and presenting the topic. Just to give a face to the name, right? I am Sucharita, and with me I have
Ankur. Hi, everyone.
So our topic today, right? Moving elephant byte by byte in booking. What does it mean? Let's start with this elephant analogy. So in mythological story, there was a story where if you take bunch of blind men who never saw an elephant and then just ask them what it is and place them at different parts of that animal, they will just touch and feel and say what it is. So some may say it's a fan, some may say it's a tree, some may say it's a rope. So different perspective, right? The exact same analogy works with booking. Booking being so huge, its scale is massive, it has multiple brands and other subsidiaries. It is very difficult to understand the scale, and the part in which we work on, we think that is booking, right? So for most of us in the room, I know, what do you mean by booking? What comes into your mind when you listen to word booking? Travel? It's mostly accommodation, right? We go to bookings.com to book hotels. For me, it is everything other than accommodation, because I am part of Trips business unit, and Trips does everything other than accommodation. So we do support flight, we do support car, taxi, airport ride, but not accommodation. For Ankur, interestingly, he is in fintech, so it is finance for him. For someone who works in Opentable, it is like a restaurant table booking for them. Now, how does it matter? Why do I care about different perception, how booking is operating and how booking is working? It matters because booking's vision is making every trip a connected trip. Now, you cannot build a connected trip unless you have the holistic idea of what is happening in the platform. And you cannot do any AI-based revolution, you cannot do any modernization, you cannot enable the AI/ML use cases, and you cannot give our customer the best-in-class experience from our platform. So this is why it matters to understand how scalable it is. Now let's understand the scale through some numbers. Do you know how many room nights were booked in 2023 through booking platform? Anyone? Yeah? 1 billion, right? Awesome. All right, do you know how many listing of properties are there in the booking website? Any guess? 10 million?
More than 20 millions.
More than 20 million, you're close. It is 28 millions, which includes the 6 million booking home and apartments, right? And do you know, I think it is an easy answer. Do you know how many customer-facing brand we have? Anyone? Louder? 6? It is actually 5. Booking.com, Priceline, Agoda, Kayak and Opentable. And there are many other subsidiaries to mention, right? So quick fact check. So in 2023, Booking has reported 150 billion of gross booking with 1 billion of room night booking, and Booking operates in 220 countries through these 5 major customer-facing brand and many other subsidiaries, right? So the problem still remains. The problem is, how do we make a scalable infrastructure where we can have easy access of all of our assets so that we can build every trip a connected trip? When I say every trip a connected trip, it means that when you go to booking website, it will be planning your trip. You don't have to, you just need to mention where do you want to go and maybe a couple of preferences, and it will plan your trip. You don't have to book each individual line item one by one. So that's our promise, that we will make every trip a connected trip. Let's see how. So behind that, we believe that it is our data strategy that is working to bring all of these scalable infrastructure. There is a scalable infrastructure behind it which is bringing all of these data together and making it possible to have every trip a connected trip. Now, what are there in our data strategy? The first one, right, it is a data mesh or fabric-based cloud platform. Why do we need it? Booking has historically had many acquisitions, so there are a lot of legacy to carry forward. And you cannot do any data analytics, any machine learning without having all of your data in one platform. So Booking came up with a cloud platform where you can easily migrate all of your legacy data set. So that's our first one. The second one is to have a data and ML platform on top of that cloud platform, which is modern, which is governed, which is compliant, and of course self-service. Now governed because we want to understand what are the data assets we are creating, what is our data properties, right? It has to be compliant because we are primarily in European Union region. And then it has to be completely self-service. Although Booking provides all the tools and technologies for you to play with data, it is the individual owner of the data who has to produce the data, who has to do all kind of computation and enable different kind of consumption pattern. So it is completely self-service, right? So that is our second offering, which is for the data and ML platform. And the last one, not the least, is it enables different consumption pattern. So to name few is like it enables different analytics, machine learning, experimentation to deal with this data set, right? Moving forward, this is the architecture. Architecture is my favorite word, where you don't deal with a lot of technical jargons in terms of architecture, but it gives you fair idea of what's happening behind the scene in our data and ML platform, right? And it consists of 7 major building blocks. On the left-hand side, we have the data producer, where we support batch and stream-based ingestion. We do have change data capture. All of these are supported. The batch and stream ingestion is supported by Kafka. And the very important part of it is data asset creation. So any producer want to bring something into this platform has to register the asset. We need to know what you are bringing in so that later on the data governance and lineage is taken care of. And on the right-hand side, we have the consumption layer. We'll come back to that, but in between we have the data foundation, data storage and compute, and data privacy and support. In data foundation, we have 2 main building blocks, which are the data stewardship and lineage. So every producer producing anything on this platform has to define 3 levels of stewardship. Those are the business stewardship, the technical stewardship, and the data management stewardship. Together, all these 3 roles make sure that all of our data are registered, they are classified, the lineage is maintained, and we have the data governance in control. Moving to data privacy, right? So important thing here is asset classification, because you need to take care of your PCI and PII data. You cannot compromise with those data sets. So every data has to be classified for PII, PCI, and we make sure that those data are encrypted all through, and it is only accessed by the right individual. And at the same time, we do have attribute-based access control, where we make sure that only the relevant data goes to relevant people. It's not open to everyone for everything. Now in the storage part, right, the entry point is Amazon S3. So all the data you ingest, it comes into the Amazon S3. And on top of that, we do a lot of processing. We have our data is hosted in Snowflake. And in that Snowflake, we have different zones. And we'll double click into that area a little bit to see our end-to-end data flow there. But it is like different zones of Snowflake which serve the purpose of data warehouse here. In terms of compute, we definitely use Apache Spark, and along with that, for the modernization, we have dbt. In terms of support, we have the data validation service, which makes sure that all of the data quality are maintained within that platform. So we make sure that data accuracy, timeliness, and completeness are checked. And we do show all of these result in a Grafana dashboard. And along with that, we have data availability service, which tells you at each attribute level when the data is available for a particular partition or for a particular day or moment. So these are the 5 major building blocks in the middle, and on the right-hand side, we have the data consumers, and there we have the metrics store. So we just had a session on metrics as a service. So we believe that democratizing metrics is very important. So this is the store where we keep all of our metric definition is fed from our confirm zone of data warehouse. We make sure that metrics are consistent, and then a consistent reporting happens through the Tableau platform. We can also, like the data science machine learning user can connect the use Amazon SageMaker to do the analytics. We also support experimentation and all the AI ML use case on top of this platform. But on the right-hand side, I will keep it for Ankur to double-click further. Moving on, let's now see how the data flows end-to-end through this platform, right? And the heart of any online travel aggregator, which Booking is one of the online travel aggregator, it's the transaction or order data. So that order data is ingested into the raw zone of the data lake. Along with that, we have the behavioral data. Now, what do we mean by behavioral data is, it is the customer's buying pattern. It could be the customer's shopping pattern, the research pattern, right? We research 10 times before we go for a vacation. So this data tells us whether the customer is looking for a quiet vacation, or he's an adventure lover, he's looking for a place maybe which is pet friendly, whether he's always blocking a cab along with a flight, what are the different search patterns they are navigating through our website. That's the behavioral data. So along with order data, the behavioral data are event ingested into the raw zone of data lake. And as mentioned, right, this whole journey is about migration and modernization. So we made sure all of our legacy data flows into the raw zone of data lake at the same time. Now I have all of different data set in our raw zone, and then the further processing happen in the data warehouse zone, where the first thing that we do for the order data, we do data vault modeling. So we believe modeling is at the heart of our data platform, where we make sure that we have defined all the critical data element, we have defined the relationship between different elements, and we know exactly what is happening in our confirm zone. So by the time the data moves to confirm zone, we have all of our data element defined and the relationship sorted. In terms of behavioral data, we don't do the data vault modeling, we go to dimensional modeling. And then that data is also available in the confirm zone. Also, all the common dimensions are pulled together from a central repository of the Snowflake. At this point of time, I have all of my data arranged and then confirm into the final zone of data warehouse, and the consumption happen from there. And if needed, we also build some of the aggregate layer to support the analytics, right? From that point, the data goes to metric reporting, and from there we have all of the machine learning use cases. You can connect your Jupyter notebook directly to the final zone of data warehouse, and from there we call it an information delivery layer. The consumption happen. Now, what happened in the consumption, how we support different AI ML use cases, and how we make sure that the vision of Booking, which is making every trip a connected trip. I will let Ankur to double click on that topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Sucharita. You know, when I looked at Sucharita's part of the presentation, I was like, okay, what else is there left to speak about data? You know, you've outlined the flow of data at Booking. You've talked about where we ingest data, where it goes. And I was thinking, okay, how can we add value to this? So I am there on the right-hand side as a data consumer. I am in fintech. I have a lens of money always on whatever we are doing. So, what is a data consumer in a modern data setup? So let's look a little bit at that. All right. So what do we consume? You know, if you look at what we consume on a regular basis, our data sources are one. In today's world, if you are interacting with consumers, real-time data is your very critical source of data and something that you need to be able to ingest and respond to. Then you have operational data, which is, once you've ingested, you've made some sense of it. And then you have analytical data. Traditionally, this is more offline data, which you're using for metrics, for training, and so on. Now, things change slightly in terms of what data you use where, which is why you, in terms of your consumption platforms, you definitely have your AI and ML platforms, which consume data from all of these three sources. So, traditionally, we of course use analytical data to train models. We use operational data. And in certain cases, in a future world, you might also be using real-time data to ingest into models. And Booking, if you see, as an organization, one of its main functions is to make money in a governed way. So you need to have operations, you need to have reporting. So obviously those are, hygiene consumers, if you will, where we are consuming data from the very same sources. And then you have analytics, the consumers for which are again varied, right from operational folks consuming operational analytics, right up to executives consuming health of the business. So here you have your consumers, to which I would also like to add regulatory. The moment that you start touching either consumer data or you start handling money, you inevitably come in touch with some regulation or the other, and which means having all of the infrastructure below becomes really important. You need to have the ability to not only source real-time and near real-time data, ingest it, be able to respond to it. You need to have the ability to scale your data because, holidays, suddenly you have a 5x surge in people looking for stuff, and maybe, a similar surge or in bookings. How do you handle that unless you're highly scalable? You need to know, for governance purposes and for sanity purposes, where each piece of data is coming from. Remember, at Booking, it is not only high volume business, it is a high value business per transaction, because you are doing hotel bookings, other sort of bookings where people spend a considerable amount of money. You need to be able to process data at a high bandwidth. In addition to all this, because in a modern world, as an organization, if you are to survive and to grow, you need to be curious. You will want to know more and more about the world around you. You will want to say, hey, if I present slightly different options to my consumer, how will they behave? If my consumer behaves slightly differently to me, how will I behave? So you need to be able to experiment, monitor those experiments, and actually understand the outcomes of those experiments to be able to grow in your understanding and use that understanding to grow your business. So we consider that also as an important consumer of all of the data setup that we have. Moving over to the next slide. I thought it would be nice, Sucharita said a couple of times, data consumer, Ankur is on the right-hand side, consuming data. And I said, okay, am I consuming data or am I doing something more with it? So I thought we should double-click on a couple of areas. So let's look at machine learning. And while this is not very different from what an organization would do for ML, there are a couple of things and a couple of perspectives that we must have. One is, when you consume data for ML, let's say for model training, what are you actually doing? You need to create features. You need to store those features, sometimes in vector databases, online databases. You need to serve out, model scoring requests. So now what have you done? You've taken in data, you've massaged it, you've applied thought process to it, but you've also created new data, which means you are now not only a data consumer, you are a data producer, and all of the rules that Sucharita spoke about earlier apply. Scalability, governance, the ability to respond, the ability to look backwards and forwards, and so on. And since now we are talking in the domain of machine learning, not only must we be able to serve models, we must also be able to observe those, what is actually happening. Now we must apply more data on top of it to explain those models. And like I said, we need to be able to experiment. And I'll talk a little bit more about it in a later slide about experimentation, because it is a very important area. And then, when you look at slightly more offline version of data consumption in terms of analytics, you have data warehouses, you have your business intelligence tools. But in the modern world today, if you tell your, stakeholder, I'm getting the data in today, and yes, I will publish a report 2 days from now, 3 days from now, or even tomorrow, you're likely to get a pushback. You're likely to say, hey, I'm running a business here. I need to know now what is happening, or at least in the next hour, or at least give me an indication if your data is dirty, clean it, do whatever, but you cannot keep me waiting. So it's a different perspective on analytics, that analytics must not only be on your data, which you are comfortable with, but it must really be fast. So which means you must be very sure of your metric definitions. So we have spoken a lot about how to serve metrics, but a lot of times where people trip up is in terms of defining a particular metric in all situations. How will this metric work if a consumer behaves in this manner or that manner? How will you serve the metric? Who will you serve the metric to? At what level? When you serve a metric at the executive level versus serving it at the operational level, how will that metric look like? How will the insights look like? So there is, again, a lot of work there, and it is all ultimately data output, because you need the ability to look back, you need to learn from it, and do better every time. So moving on, let's talk about how data supports experimentation at Booking. So a few key things about experimentation. That one, you have a large business, you need to keep the business running. You need to be able to isolate your experiment, you need to be able to run the experiment, you need to be able to be consistent across various experiments, because let's say you have a metric like conversion rate, right? And you run 10 different experiments which focus on conversion rate, and all of them have a slightly different definition of it. At the end of it, when you go and say, give me X million dollars to expand this experiment, there is no real way to kind of judge, right? So you have to keep so many things in mind. Let's go through how one would typically go about experimenting. So one is, of course, you need a hypothesis. What should the experiment be? And that is driven by your past analytic patterns, which people in the organization keep on looking at, or at times systems throw up. You couple that with market data, which may be external to the data you have inside the organization. And then you need to define your core metrics. You need to look at past experiments and see you're not wasting company money. You need to be able to look at past outcomes in storage to see if you can derive a better metric out of that. And you need to be able to track all your data from experiments so that you can, you're able to keep multiple experiments distinct. What you really don't want is stuff like you're changing, let's say, the background image color, and you're changing the background color, and everything merges to the same. So now you'll no longer have anything out there on your web page, right? So which is why having an experimentation platform which enables you to put in hypotheses, which enables you to define metrics and check them against prior metrics, which enables you to define the range of experiment. How, for example, how long should you run an experiment for? Things like, simple things like what should be the power of the experiment, which will enable you to accept results and so on. When you actually execute, how do you monitor an experiment? And then ultimately, how do you analyze, and what are your criteria, which are consistent criteria for accepting outcomes, right? And all of this design outcome storage is very valuable, and it has to be run alongside the business, which means it is again part of your broad level data design for it to be a successful thing. All right, moving to another area. So now we have been talking a lot about modernized data, data in the cloud and what it can enable. So it's an offering from Booking called the AI Trip Planner, where where you want to have simple interactions with the customer, which enable the customer to have a great experience while booking a complete trip. So imagine that it goes alongside of a customer saying, hey, I want to book a trip, and then you're having a conversation with, let's say, your AI trip planner, and you say, hey, it's a trip with family, and I want to travel to Spain. And all alongside, it is combining your input with what it knows about you and what it knows about customers similar to you, to start presenting you with options, to start presenting you with hopefully a more optimized version of what it thinks you would like, so that you have a much easier, much more faster booking experience. All of that, and I want to focus, a lot of people have spoken about chatbots and the like, but if you look at the underlying infrastructure that must support such a thing, you will have multiple models all working on governed data, which could be deep learning models. You will have recommender systems, you will have GANs, and you will have generative AI, all of them focused on different parts of parts of making trip booking easier for the customer. And that is what I want to emphasize, that all of the AI, ML, analytics that we've been talking about is supported by great data, and ultimately supports making experience the world even easier for everyone in the world. So I will stop here. This was our presentation. Thank you. You've been a great crowd. We've really enjoyed being here, and we're open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.